coming. My name is Dr. Randy Bertolis, and this is John Vuchetich. John pops up everywhere, most often when you least expect him, but always in a pleasant way. John came to me about a year ago and wanted to do an honors project on his hometown. He wanted to burrow in and dig into the history of industry in Norfolk, Nebraska. So here is the man from Norfolk himself, John Vuchetich. John, the floor is yours.
So, like Dr. B said, we're looking at Norfolk, Nebraska, specifically through industry. Just what we're going over today, we've got a little introduction that's going to be right now. And then I wasn't sure if you wanted to just hear about the final research or the whole process for getting there. So I'm giving you a little bit of both because I think that's a bit interesting. I assume most of you are somewhat familiar with Norfolk, but the history, I'm not sure if you were all there 150 something years ago. So we'll go over that just a little bit to get context for the rest of it. And then the two big things we're looking at are the Matheson and Sons cereal grain mill, which was known by a few other names. To get a good context for that, we're also going to look at Colonel Charles Matheson. He popped up a lot, and as such, he's in the presentation for the research there. And then we're also going to look at the Norfolk American Crystal Sugar Beet Factory. Those two specifically we'll get into why, but Norfolk has had a lot of industry throughout its history, and those two were the most, both early and, in my opinion, impactful. Also, there wasn't a ton of research about them, so I figured might as well look a little more to that. Finally, we're going to kind of look at Norfolk today as opposed to the history of Norfolk to kind of see how those two industrial places changed the town's landscape as well as trajectory. So who am I? Dr. Bertolis did a wonderful job introducing me. I'm John Vuchetich. I'm a social science education major. So much of this presentation is through that lens. We are looking at Norfolk, Nebraska through industry specifically. Again, that was covered in my wonderful introduction. And if you are in the wrong room, this is the last chance to go through that little door back there and get out of here. You can even take a drink on the way. All right, we're all here, we're all happy. Perfect. So, why did I choose this topic? It was a combination of convenience and interest. I love local history. I think that's the most interesting thing to look at, partially because it's much more specific, and it's much harder to find a source on Wikipedia. You go to Wikipedia for Norfolk, Nebraska, you're not going to have really any of these things outside of a footnote. So it makes you really dig into it. I was doing my research over the summer, so it was just a lot more convenient to do the research in Nebraska, in Norfolk, so I didn't have to travel and all that kind of stuff. My primary sources were at Elkhorn Valley Museum and Norfolk Public Library. These were mainly newspaper sources, because there's not really another history outside of that for it. Two of my other great resources were Cheryl Schmeckpepper's books. She's a local historian. I met with her a few times. She wrote the book on Norfolk history. And she was one of the people who helped me in actually shaping the idea for the project. Initially, the project was looking at Norfolk, Nebraska, and its flooding history. I was around during 2019, if anyone remembers the flooding that happened throughout the entire state of Nebraska at that time. And I thought it would be interesting to look at that in history. The original title for the research was Norfolk, Nebraska's development on the riverfront and the pros and cons there. But the more that I looked at it, the more it became apparent that Norfolk, Nebraska didn't really develop on the riverfront, but it was on the riverfront because of industry. And so it became much more important to look at the industry in Norfolk, Nebraska in terms of its development rather than just the river itself. That's not to say the river didn't have a large impact on here, and a lot of the research is still looking at that specifically, but it is the actual presentations about industry. To what extent? So again, there wasn't a ton of pre-existing research on these things, which is why I love local history. You've got 3 articles in the Norfolk Daily News in the last 100 years regarding these things. No books, no publications there. A footnote in the only history book talking about it. If you really wanted to, you could look at the Coxey-Comey book regarding Norfolk's 100-year anniversary, which was 50-something years ago now. And it has a paragraph advertising for the Matheson and Sons CO grade mill, which changed its name. We'll get on that later. But really, this paper is looking, and in extent of the presentation, the main project is a paper, of course, is looking at more of a surface level, taking apart the history and kind of trying to place it rather than interpreting other work. So basically all I have is primary sources, which is awesome. Yeah, I think that's what I've got here. So Norfolk, Nebraska. Was it founded in 65 or, what is that, 81? 81. 81 is when it was recognized as a state, or not a state, a city, there, village really. 65 is when you get the first people in the area. So we're going to do this like a history teacher because that's what we're going to be. Who knows who the first people in Norfolk, Nebraska were? You live there, you get to answer. Go ahead.
It's a group of Lutheran immigrants from Germany.
Germany and Wisconsin. So Norfolk, Nebraska is one of those post-Civil War homesteading collections, basically. The first people there were a group that 2 wagon trains. This is local history that Norfolk is very proud of. You have 2 groups of German-American Lutherans who fled from both Wisconsin, partially due to overcrowding, partially due to restlessness in post-Civil War, and from Germany, similar reasons leaving Germany, who resulted in coming up to the North Fork of the Elkhorn River. Their reasons for settling there were obviously the water and the farmland, thinking that that would be good. The actual location of the town wasn't really settled until 66. And that actual location of the town is very similar to where it is today. Modern day downtown is just a few blocks away from historic Old Town. So that hasn't changed, although the actual view of the Old Town is very different now than it would have been. It's a place known as Johnston's Park, Johnson's Park, and there would have been a river running through there. There's not, and we'll cover that later. At the time of its founding, the time of its establishment, it had a post office, Lutheran churches, and frame houses. Importantly, frame houses required milled timber, and the closest mill would have been in West Point. So Norfolk, for its early years, very much relied on areas to the south, mainly Omaha and West Point, and because it was on the Elkhorn River, they were able to easily get supplies up there safely and effectively. It was also in Winnebago land, notably, which comes into play with Charles Matheson. Before 1964, Norfolk had experienced 4 major and 11 minor floods. And you get to be a minor flood when you accrue a certain amount of area and property damage according to the Norfolk records, that is. So over 100 or so years, every 10 years or so, there was a flood that damaged at least 10% of the downtown to the point it needed to be rebuilt. 64 is an important year because that's when we rerouted the river. Again, more on that later. So it's an important marketplace for selling crops at the beginning. It's a kind of a hub, and it never really grew past about 4,000 people in its first 40 years. Rather, community groups would break off and begin other towns, such as Battle Creek. It was predominantly Lutheran, and predominantly farming for the economy there. It didn't really have any meaningful industry. If you look at Norfolk today, its major employers are industrial things. Steel and dairy are the 2 big ones there. And the population, again, mainly farmers, large families, many people dying of it. This is probably the thing we have the most records on because the cemeteries keep an excellent record on that, and the genealogy is probably the most popular thing to look at Elkhorn Valley Museum and the library. So Colonel Charles Matheson, Born in 1812 in Connecticut, he served 3 terms in the Connecticut legislature and 2 terms in the Senate. He would join the Civil War. He would be appointed as a colonel. He served in the 11th Connecticut Regiment. And after his time in the Civil War, he became the Winnebago agent for this area. That's kind of how he got out here. He was a Lutheran, which is part of why he was placed in this area, because it had a predominant American Lutheran community at the time. It still does. And his term expired in 65. Ironically, 65 is the same year that you get your first settlers in Norfolk. So his family, himself, his 3 sons, and 4 daughters at the time, large family, they went to Norfolk, Nebraska. Not a member of the community, but what he did bring was a lot of connections to both establish the post office before the village was officially established, connections to get Norfolk, Nebraska established as a city. And he also brought, interestingly enough, from his time as a Native American agent, Indian agent, he also brought a lot of connections to West Point and Omaha, which allowed for trade of timber, which wasn't a possibility beforehand. So Matherson is also one of the people credited as a founding father of Norfolk. What this means is he was part of the group that drew up the town plot. And the important thing is he was the one who really pushed for it to be right on the riverfront. The people who were there were aware that the river was going to flood somewhat frequently. And that's actually in their notes for, you can find these in City Hall, but they have planner's notes for the actual layout of the city, which is interesting. So they were aware that it was going to flood. He wanted it developed on the riverfront because he believed that having a mill of some kind in town was the only way the town could survive. Again, he must have been very convincing because everyone else in the town had taken 1 or 2 wagon trains and were immediate family or parish members. He was an outside member saying, yes, I know this area is going to flood. Let's build here anyways because I want to have a mill. And he ended up getting that, which was quite interesting in the historical sense, just to see how one person is shaping the location of it. Let's see. I think that's what we've got for him. The important thing, the mill would later be repurchased and under Newco's grain, Newco's cereal mill, Norfolk Mills, and Sugar City Mills. Sugar City Mills is actually being caused by the American Crystal Sugar Company. They kind of changed the name to match sugar. But the mill itself, it was initially run by Matherson and his 2 sons. That lasted for about 30 years until the sons sold it because it wasn't consistently working. It served as both a timber and a grain mill, and it was the mill next up from West Point. So if you go to West Point, has anyone ever driven, the distance between West Point and Norfolk? You're taking that in a carriage, that's a 5-day journey. So if you want to get your grain milled, you have to either do it by hand, which you're not going to sell anything that way, or you have to take all of it down on a 5-day wagon trip to West Point, and then back after it gets grained, after it gets milled and turned into edible grain. So having the mill in town was a big boon for them. The mill came in '66, so right as the town was finished founding. So about a year of people realizing, this kind of sucks to make this trip, you get the mill. It was later sold to Norco, and it was under Norco for a while. It closed in the '60s because it just wasn't viable to run it anymore. The important thing here is it provided a reason for people to stay in Norfolk, stay close to that. It allowed for trading in the area, which would later lead to an actual town district in the village, which would kind of snowball and make it a city like it is today. I'm going through my time very quickly. I need to speed it up. Eventually, because of the change in water levels, there were years where the mill was either completely flooded out or didn't have any water at all. The Elkhorn is very fluctuant, and so that kind of led to its closure because it just wasn't viable to keep it running. Sugar City Mills, again, this is, the actual mill house was moved twice because of river levels and the river getting rerouted. There's a picture of it at Sugar City Mills. You can find that in Images of America, Norfolk. And then Norfolk Daily News also did a bit of an article. The only thing remaining of it is the pump house. The actual mill is gone. And they did an interview with one of the last people that worked there, which was very interesting. Today, it is still on the historic riverfront with the pump. It is also a geocache and a tourist destination. A geocache is really a point of interest that hunters can go find, and there's a little toy in there that, yay, you found it. But Norfolk, Nebraska put a park around it, and it's a tourist destination when really it's kind of just an old building with a hole in the ground, because the river, again, isn't next to it. But they're very interested in kind of preserving it. The Norfolk American Crystal Sugar Company. So this one's interesting, and I think this was probably what got me to look at industry rather than just the riverfront. So Norfolk, Nebraska did a lot of pushing to get the sugar mill actually in Norfolk. You've got news articles from Grand Island, West Point, Columbus, Omaha, and Norfolk, all of those papers. Ads from Norfolk saying, hey, you should come up to Norfolk and build your mill here. We want to have the industry. They changed the city name to Sugar City in an attempt to get the sugar company to come up there. They changed the mill name, that's where that picture is, here. And so they also fundraised because the city didn't have an established bank. So they fundraised from the local members to get a bunch of money to say, hey, we can give you a loan to build your factory here, because we don't have a bank that can actually do that. So imagine going door to door and saying, hey, I need $50 from you so that we can build a steel factory in Wayne, and then they'll pay it back to you. And going around door to door, literally asking for money to build that. And that was the reason that it actually got up here, that and all of the applicants. There's not a photo of the exterior of the factory, so I've given you one. I believe that's the one in Grand Island. Very similar factories, again, built right on the riverfront, using that water for the actual process. Typo there, excuse me. The fundraising, it was also needed significant hydropower, which is why it chose Norfolk. The sugar factory, the important thing here is that it was the first major industrial site in Norfolk. It basically doubled the population during its time there. And many of the zoning and neighborhoods in Norfolk, Nebraska are there because they were developed for the influx of people. So all of your layout of Norfolk, the reason it is to the north of the downtown district rather than surrounding it evenly is because that sugar mill, the workers wanted a faster commute, so they lived there. And that's your historic building, which is awesome. The company reconsolidated into American Crystal Sugar in 1899, and that would lead to the close of the factory in Norfolk. 2 years later, it had been open for just 14 years. An important selling point for Norfolk history is that there were no lethal accidents in this factory during this time in comparison to other sugar factories in Grand Island, which had a handful during the same period. So Norfolk, its selling point on this is we're the safest. Look, Norfolk farmers are smart and durable and awesome. Today, the river was rerouted in '66. That's when it completed. It began rerouting in '62 in response to a major flood that basically got rid of the entire downtown district. And the route the river flows today is the same that it was rerouted to. And then the other thing is that Norfolk has been really pushing for parks and using that waterfront, again, trying to use the river to attract people to the city. They've got 3 major parks on the waterway. They've got walkways. They're really developing this. And the city council has been pushing every year for multi-million-dollar renovations to the park. Up here in the top, we've got a sample image for that. So while the river is very much still part of Norfolk, it has been rerouted to wrap around the downtown area. Importantly, the 3 largest employers outside of Faith Regional Hospital, which I would argue exists to support the population brought by these 3. You have Nucor Steel, Norfolk Iron and Metal, and Highland Dairy. All 3 of these, again, in the top 4 largest employers, I believe Faith Regional is number 2. All of these use the hydropower in Norfolk, as well as base kind of their existence off of the previous industry developments there. You get the railroad because of the Crystal Sugar Company, and that's what attracts these, and then the hydropower keeps them around, and the city has a wonderful interaction with that. It still has a lot of agriculture, and it still floods from time to time, although you don't get a yearly flood that damages the downtown anymore. You get the major ones. I believe I've run through my time here, so do you guys have any questions for me? I'll take any question. What you got?
Was there anything about this that surprised you?
So I think for me the most surprising thing was the fundraising to get industry. Because that was like, when I'm actually looking for industry in the river, that was like the thing that had like 50 times more articles across multiple newspapers. For many of these, you've got like 7 or 8 posts regarding it, which was really wacky. The other interesting thing, which I kind of sped over because I was beginning to go over time here and I don't want to keep you guys all day, was the Matherson and Sons mill, the Nucor mill. The population enjoyed having it there so much that they made a parade float at 1/15th scale and then drove it around for like a decade, which I think is just wonderful. I'm going to keep you here till 9, so we're gonna ask questions. We're gonna sit here awkwardly.
So I'm going to ask you a question that's sort of ancillary to your research, but I'm curious about people calling it Norfolk versus Norfolk. Did that go all the way back to 1865, or is that a new development?
That's like Norfolk's popular story. In sending the letter to get it approved, there was a topographical error, or not topographical, typo. There was a typo. I'm failing for the word there. They wanted it to be the North Fork of the Elkhorn River. The existing town that was spelled similarly is Norfolk, Virginia. And so in writing, they're like, oh, they must have miswritten this. We're going to make it Norfolk. And that was the end result. Again, that communication was made possible by Matherson's connections with the legislature, which is just wacky, I think.
So it's been like that from the beginning, pretty much.
It has been like that begrudgingly from the beginning. Again, the goal is Norfolk, for the North Fork of the Elkhorn River, which the town is founded on. Anyone else?
And they say that about half the people pronounce it Norfolk and the other half pronounce it Norfolk. But you rarely hear anybody pronounce it Norfolk anymore. I hear Norfolk a lot more when I go over there. It's an interesting story. Who knows if it's been lost truly in the mists of history or not.
Well, and among other things, they do have the actual letter that has the typo, as well as Norfolk has lots of festivals, and the city itself is pushing for fork. They have like a fork fest, again, on the riverfront, in the park where the mill is located, where the historic Old Town is, every year called Fork Fest, to kind of commemorate the city founding.
Yes, would you like to introduce?
Up here all the way from Norfolk is my lovely family, father, mother, youngest sibling. And they've done the whole journey all the way up here. Otherwise, I assume many of you are from rural regional
It
geography.
didn't take 5 days, did it? No.
No,
All right, good.
up to Wayne would only be 4 by wagon. And there's no mill up here, so I would unless you're trying to get out of Norfolk, which is why many of the smaller settlements around here are founded. Well, got 5 minutes left if there's any questions. Otherwise, grab a drink on your way out.
All right. Thank you, John.